situation because I really thought that we put out pamphlets, for example, welcoming the media to Chicago, and it really amazed me on the first day, before the convention even opened, that people like Frank McGee on NBC and Walter Cronkite on CBS started off with their incredibly belligerent attitude towards the city. Cronkite, on the first day, on Sunday, before the convention opened, said that Chicago was a police state and there was no other way to describe it. Now, if Walter, whom I've since been with on many occasions, had traveled through Chicago on that Sunday, he would have found out that 99% of the area of Chicago you couldn't even find a policeman, far from being a police state. There were some policemen around, a couple thousand policemen around the International Amphitheater where the convention was going to be held, and downtown where all the delegates were going to be held, were staying. We were really amazed of the animosity of the three networks that came off the pad, like Life magazine. I arranged, stupidly, for two high-ranking police officers to go out to the convention to have a picture taken for Life magazine. Now, stupidly, the two policemen stood behind the fence out there, which had barbed wire on top that we didn't have anything to do with. It's erected by the Democratic National Committee. But Life magazine's cover showed the two policemen peering out from behind this cyclone fence with the barbed wire. You know, and everything the media did was geared to set a tone of conflict. It was really, I think, one of the shocking moments of American media history. And happily, the three networks have learned their lessons through the years. They have made great efforts since 1968 to be far more objective than they were during those terrible days. See, the party line of those who were in the streets was that the Chicago police blew its cool. Now, just the opposite is true. The police, we were amazed that the networks, for example, came to Chicago filled with this kind of animosity. So you know, in the weeks prior to the Democratic Convention, the national and local news media did everything possible to hype the situation. Day after day, I would receive phone calls from media people saying, please, may we come over and televise your shooting range. We'd like to show Chicago policemen with pistols firing. I said, no, we're not going to do that right now. We got other things. They're not even down on the range right now. One day, a salesman parked an armored vehicle in the alley behind police headquarters, and the media went into ecstasy. He had called the stations and said the Chicago police were going to buy this armored vehicle. The assignment editors really, it was one of the great emotional highs of their lives. They thought, oh my God, these fools are buying an armored vehicle. Television cameras descended, and they were crushed to learn that the goofball who made the phone call, it was his own truck. He had nothing to do with anything. The Chicago police weren't going to buy any armored vehicles. Day after day after day, the national media said that there was only one exit route out to the convention, and it had to go through a black ghetto, and there was going to be danger to all of the delegates. The national media lusted for a conflict in Chicago. The Chicago police, I assure you, on that Sunday night, I thought that there'd be a problem out at the convention hall identifying who was in charge of police details and things of that nature. I always feared that there might be fighting, because all you needed to do was defy legitimate police orders, and you can do that today and have a fight. We were the ones who were amazed that the industry, the news industry, working in conjunction with the mob, hyped this whole thing. Chicago police weren't anticipating any kind of a real conflict with the demonstrators. The majority of American people don't like those who decide to take the law into their own hands and score political points by getting into fights with policemen. And we're very happy that since 1968, and certainly since the early 70s, that form of a confrontation has not been popular with the media in the United States. The real test, of course, is how the electorate feels regarding the elected official who was ultimately in charge of everything in Chicago. And the first chance they had to voice their opinions was in 1971, 3 years after the Democratic Convention. And in that particular election, we have 50 geographic subdivisions in Chicago, 50 wards. And Richard Daley carried all 50 wards. Now that tells you something about the reaction of the people of Chicago towards the if anything, that was the referendum on the 1968 Democratic Convention, and Daley won it on a ward basis 50-0. I think the saddest legacy of the 60s is the tendency of a portion of the media to try to pull some glamour out of those terrible years. They were terrible years in that the drug culture got hold in America and was glorified by many people in prominent positions and by the national media. And there was a self-destructive defiance of legitimate democratic authority, which was really harmful to the lives of a substantial number of people who succumbed to the idea that it is not desirable to try to have any kind of an ordered or structured life, but to be in a defiant position regarding the country that they live in and the community that they live in. Regarding the police, I would think that police power is always incredibly dangerous, and that a realistic media always watches and observes policemen and always tries to restrain policemen from unjust actions against citizens and any interference that's illegitimate with the ordinary person. Now, the ordinary person also is aware that policemen can abuse this authority. What was one of the shocking things of the 1960s, that we had this incredibly dumb generation of people that were shocked that policemen abuse authority. Any kid who grew up on the side streets of Chicago knew from the time they were 3 years old that policemen can abuse authority. What amazed me was kids from suburbs who apparently grew up with this idea of officer friendly and all that kind of stuff, didn't know that he or she who has authority to arrest you, has authority to deprive you of your liberty, can abuse that authority. Don't be shocked by that. Make sure it doesn't happen, that there isn't any abuse of citizens' rights. But don't think that you never heard of it. Police agencies all throughout history can abuse their authority. What is dumb is to have a generation of intellectuals and media people who are amazed at that. It could happen today if you wanted to go out and you could have fights with policemen at any time. Now, to try to draw some comparison between Chicago and Beijing is really, once again, following that same syndrome that we cannot make any distinctions. We don't understand what's happening. No one was shot in Chicago. Not one human being was wounded in Chicago by any kind of a pistol or rifle or anything of that nature. And there is no comparison between an encounter between citizens and the police in Chicago and what happened in Tiananmen Square.